let's start off with an acknowledgement of country. The University of Queensland acknowledges the traditional owners and the custodianship on the lands on which we meet and conduct our research. We're really lucky to be here. If you look outside, right, you can imagine all the beautiful nature that is around the university. And note that this university has always been on a location of teaching and learning and science, and that Indigenous people were the first scientists in this land. With that, I'd like to announce our very special seminar by Alice Twomey. She's a rock star, technically an all-star of science, having won all-star as well, all-star and a superstar and a rock star of science, having won several awards, lots of research published in very interdisciplinary fields across engineering and environment and conservation, and we're really lucky to have her speak today.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Today, I'm not actually presenting research. I'm presenting a perspective piece that was published by a group of ECRs, early career researchers, here at CBCS. Now, this work was undertaken during a very effective writing retreat on Heron Island. And so with that, I would like to do an acknowledgement of country for Heron Island, which is the area where this work was conducted. Now, Heron Island doesn't have an Indigenous name, a known Indigenous name, and there are currently no claims to native title for this area. However, the sea country surrounding Heron Island belongs to the people of the Gureng, the Gurung, the Bailai, and the Tarabalang Bunda peoples. And so I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any of the First Nations people listening to this talk. So the title of my talk, Impact and Success Are Not the Same, Navigating Transdisciplinary Conservation Research for Early Career Researchers. And this title really reflects an unlimited character limit for this talk. So this work was undertaken by myself, Jaden, Carolina, Max, Courtney, and Kevin, and we are all, or were at least at the time, ECRs in CBCS. Now, what this work is really about is the challenges to having a successful career in conservation when you're in an early career stage and when you're either interdisciplinary or additionally transdisciplinary. And if you're anything like me, we all, as members of CBCS, we all care about biodiversity conservation. It's very important to us. If you're anything like me, every now and then you have an existential crisis about your need to do good in the world, and maybe publishing in Nature isn't the way to do that. It'll get you a really successful career, but what can you say you've actually done in the world? And so I've put this photo there because every time I feel that existential dread creeping, I volunteer with Ozfish. And this is work that's being done in Moreton Bay and Quandamooka, where we build oyster reefs and deploy them out into the bay. And also anyone can sign up for this. They run every 2 weeks. So this is the paper that we've published, and it was published in Perspectives in Ecology and Conservation. And this really came from a place where we sat down and we're sick of being told by senior academics that because we work in multiple fields, that we're a jack of all trades, master of none. Because as academics, we have PhDs, we're expected to be an expert in a field. I myself am not a true coastal engineer and I'm not a true coastal ecologist. I'm a generalist, and that's usually viewed with a lot of bias and prejudice. And so this paper started as a whinge and a complaint, but talking about challenges isn't very satisfying. So this paper really talks about how we can overcome them. Now, not every challenge actually has a solution that we could identify, but we have some recommendations. And we thought I wanted to present this today because it might be useful to you if you identify as interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary. Maybe you can incorporate some of these solutions in your work and career as well. So before we get started, let's clarify some terms. So you're probably familiar with multidisciplinary work. This is when you have multiple experts, each with one individual field of expertise. So you might have a climate scientist and an economist working together to solve a common problem. Using multidisciplinary research, you generally get a more holistic solution. The next step is interdisciplinary research. And this is where you have one individual who is both, for instance, a lawyer and a biologist. So they're again providing holistic solutions, but they have a unique perspective because they truly understand the discourse of both fields. Rarer still are transdisciplinary researchers, and for the case of the authors, we are all transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary means you have a different perspective. So within the context of CBCS, we are all academics, but all of the authors also either work for government, we work as consultants in industries, or we work with NGOs. So they're the key differences. So the context in which I'm going to talk about these challenges is my own. In the paper, we go through 4 key contexts, but today I'm just going to stick to my field of research, which is ecological engineering. Now, I wouldn't hold it against you if you're not familiar with this field, but to give you a brief overview of what I actually do and why an engineer is working in biodiversity conservation. Every year globally, we spend US $13 trillion just to protect less than half of the world's coastlines, less than a third actually. And I don't know about you, but I've never owned $1 trillion. So to put that in perspective, 1 million seconds is approximately 11 days. 1 trillion seconds is about 32,000 years. So $13 trillion every year. And that number is increasing because as the sea level rises, coastal engineers, we need to build our seawalls higher and wider to try and reduce the impacts of flooding and erosion. Now, there are more sustainable solutions, specifically coastal ecosystems. For instance, mangroves and seagrass act as a barrier between land and sea, and they actually reduce the impact of flooding and erosion on our shorelines. But the reason we're not doing this already, the reason we're not restoring them is because engineers don't know how to design them, and it's up to engineers to reduce coastal flooding and erosion. That's where my research comes in. My trade is as an environmental engineer, but my PhD was in coastal ecology. And so what I do is I kind of do the physics of biology. So I turn this environment into something that engineers can use to design restoration projects. And I realize a lot of the ecologists in the audience might cringe when you hear that someone is designing the environment. But at the end of the day, sometimes for the government, ecology for ecology's sake isn't enough. If I can say we're saving X billion dollars per year on insurance premiums by conserving this landscape, it's more likely to get the project over the line. So that's my context. So why are we doing this? What is the whole point of this? The point is that challenges exist, and it's actually very difficult for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary researchers to excel. So it's difficult for us to excel in our career, but we believe we can actually have really large applied research impact that is not recognised by academia. And so I want to show you what the outcome of that is by being a little vulnerable and showing you my Google Scholar metrics. Now, I didn't want to compare myself to anyone within University of Queensland. I didn't want to embarrass them. However, this is a colleague of mine. We are at the same career stage. Well, actually we're not, but we have been in our career for approximately the same amount of time. Simon is from Uni SQ. He is an astroseismologist. His field is astronomy. He has a single area of expertise. The first thing you might notice is that, again, I have maxed out the character counts for descriptors of my research. I haven't discussed the fact that actually I do a lot in conservation, carbon sequestration, treatment wetlands. I can't actually cover what I do in simple words. It's hard to draw a box around it. The second thing you might notice is that whilst I'm almost at 150 citations, Simon's bearing down on 7,000. And you might say, oh, Alice, that's obvious. His first publication was in 2012 and mine was in 2021. This is the start of the problem. There's actually a reason for that. He did a Bachelor of Science, I did a Bachelor of Engineering. This is where the problem starts in Australia. In Australia, a Bachelor of Science is 3 years and you do an additional year to get honours. Honours doesn't exist for engineering. We have a 4-year degree. Additionally, research is not mandatory in engineering. Applied work experience is. So I graduated engineering, and to actually be able to even do a PhD at UQ at the time, I had to have a minimum 5 years work experience. I'm 5 years behind from the get-go. Now there are other pathways. For instance, for engineers to pursue academia, you can do a master's. In industry, masters are frowned upon because it makes you more expensive to employ with less experience within your cohort than the people who graduated in the same year as you. So already there is a difference between being an engineer and a scientist. So there is a setback when you compare me to the people in science who are going for the same grants. So the first challenge, I'll spend more time on others and less on some. The first one is the time and support required to actually learn a new discipline. Now, any of the HDRs in this room know that during your PhD, you're very busy, but I promise you, you have the most spare time now than you ever will in your career. And so we're always pushing deadlines, but there are opportunities here. We get funding often to do professional development, and it would be great if we didn't have to justify that professional development as having to be directly related to our current job. One of the solutions would be to include work outside of our expertise that maybe we could use. If you were a lawyer and then you also did a degree in biology, you would find a niche to answer really wicked and unique problems. But you wouldn't know those problems exist unless you had that experience. So it's really valuable, and I encourage anyone to pursue some research or an area outside of your current field of expertise. And actually just allowing time for HDRs to sit in on other lectures. I did that during my PhD. I sat in on every marine science course UQ had to offer in my first year. It was a very busy year, but I had to make that time up on my own. So there's quite a few opportunities here. Increase and broaden mentorship. Now, this is one that we don't really have a solution for. If you do a literature review, you will find that interdisciplinary work, it's not a new concept, but it is broadening more widely now. Transdisciplinary, it is pretty niche. There aren't that many senior academics who are doing this. It's more like a pyramid where you have a few senior academics who are interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary. You've got more ECRs and a lot more HDRs. The problem for us is there's just a lack of role models. I don't have any. If you know of anyone, let me know. But really the recommendations here are just ECRs, we have to pave the way for future HDRs. And we really just need to lean on each other for support. And it would be nice if there was recognition from those senior, more siloed experts in one field that they might not have the full spectrums of skills needed by transdisciplinary ECRs. For example, I have spent I'm 4 years post-PhD. I have spent half of that time working as a consultant engineer for UQ, where I actually do on-the-ground restoration. That takes time away from my research. That's not reflected on my CV anymore. The next one, improve research translation. Now, there is a lot of research about disciplinary language barriers and how this affects comprehension. This affects your research, but it also affects real-world impact. It also negatively impacts your career because when it comes to reviewing, if I publish in an ecology journal, but there is engineering in it, I really need to do that work to translate it for ecologists and vice versa. Again, we'll touch on that later, but the opportunities here, and I guess it's a challenge for everyone, is to translate your research for a broader audience. It's not reinventing the wheel if you're giving the patent of a wheel to an audience who it was not previously available for. And so for this, the first paper at the top, again, no character limit on the title. All I did was take a really common equation that you would never publish in an engineering journal. Everyone knows it. It's a circ equation. You're an idiot if you don't know it. Everyone knows it. But I translated it for a broad audience of environmental science. And I published a paper explaining it, and it's my most highly cited paper. In the second image, a different paper that I published this year, I demonstrated how we actually change the complex structure of biology into a physical model, and I wrote a paper purely on that. Another opportunity is for journal editors. If there are any editors in this room, you can facilitate transdisciplinary collaboration and interdisciplinary work through special editions and special issues. So this is one that is a very systemic problem. It's about the metrics for transdisciplinary representation. So the first one is pretty obvious. In our field of research codes, for those of you who don't know, every time you apply for a grant or you apply for a fellowship or write papers, you need to write what field of research the work comes under. And now, for example, I'm in ecological engineering. The closest FOR codes I have are engineering, interdisciplinary, ecology with other applications, miscellaneous engineering, and oceanography. That's not very satisfying. And someone would look at that and say, I have no idea what this grant is going to be about. But that's how they select reviewers as well. So I'm just going to get a wild bunch of people who broadly aren't experts in my field. Incompatible metrics of success inhibit accurate evaluation of career achievements. And what this is talking about is the fact that a lot of us actually need to publish outside of academic journals to get real impact. And so I want to show you this very bleak but eye-opening study that was conducted. So this table here was a piece of work done by some researchers where they interviewed a few hundred engineers within an Australian context. The first question was, do you consider important to keep up to date with current research? 97% yes, and most of them said that they read research every single week to keep up to date with the field, which is great news. I was quite surprised by how high that statistic was. But then the next question was, and where do you get your research from? If you want to stay up to date with research, where do you go? And we can see the first one, 65% look at industry standards. Then they go to colleagues, professional magazines, newspapers, professional bodies, technical bulletins, conferences, workshops, in-house courses, and last, research journals, where about 11% of people will actually ever get the research that we produce. That's a huge problem. And so people like myself, I do try and publish in professional magazines and go to professional bodies and technical bulletins. They're called trade journals. They're not indexed, they don't get cited, and I have no way to prove that it's ever being used, but at least I know that they're seeing it. Again, that's a metric of impact. That's not anywhere on my CV. There is no room for it on grants. It's a bit of a problem. Consequently, because I'm in both engineering and science, I have to have one foot in both camps. I have to both publish highly, I have to publish or perish for science, but I have to publish in trade journals and non-academic publications to keep up to date with engineering. Solutions, new FOR codes. If you weren't aware, every year, new FOR codes are actually produced. I don't know who produces them, but it's something that I do want to look into. You can petition to add more and they will add them with special circumstances, but having one that highlights that your work is transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary would be really useful, because that just sets a reviewer up with, oh, they're not going to be an expert in either field. This is their niche. Metrics that encapsulate outputs outside of academic research journals, that could be very easy. That could be just an extra box in a grant saying, what is your research impact outside of academia, that you can't justify with metrics like field-weighted citation impact. And we can also just do this using metrics that have already been developed. This is just one example, but there are whole frameworks that already show us how we can do this and how we can provide evidence where there seemingly isn't any. Next, reduce the structural barriers in academia that prevent career progression for interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary researchers. Ultimately, we have very unclear career paths. This goes back to mentorship. I don't have any role models. I don't know any other ecological engineers. I have no idea what me being a professor would look like. Half of the work I do is with local councils and, for instance, with Cairns Airport with Healthy Land and Water, and half of it is doing experiments and publishing papers. But I don't know where the senior professors that are still working in government, how that fits in. And again, lack of recognition of achievements outside academia. A classic example of that for myself was I was nominated as a Young Professional Engineer of Australia. Basically the highest award I could be nominated for as an engineer, but no one knows about it because, again, there is no field for that in, for instance, our Profile A at UQ, and it's not considered a federal award in science, and it often gets ignored. But because I work in ecology, they don't care about the engineering achievements. There's a few issues there. So the way we could overcome this is if there was recognition of transdisciplinary work in the relative to opportunity sections of grants. So if you're not aware, when you often write a grant, you might need to be 3 years post a PhD to apply, or 5 years. But sometimes, for instance, some of us have career interruptions. You might have gone on carer's leave, and you can say, well, I went on carer's leave, so actually I'm only 2 years, even though you're 4 years, for instance. But for me, I work full-time as a researcher on paper, but half my time is actually spent doing real-world consultancy, which takes me away from my research. So in real terms, I'm only 2 years post-PhD for my research track record, but that just means I'm ineligible for a lot of grants. Public reporting of expertise at grant reviewers. This is one that I'm particularly passionate about. Again, because of FOR codes, it would be great if when we had grant reviewers, if they actually published what FOR code they were reviewing under, so that we're increasing transparency. So for instance, because I have both ecology and engineering FOR codes on my research, it would be useful to know if that was only reviewed by engineers or only reviewed by ecologists, because you know a lot of your work is then not being understood. And promotion and tenure track positions to reward collaborative, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. We tend to reward research prestige. It would be great if we looked at some other metrics as well. And maybe they do exist in the higher level D&Es, but I'm not there yet and I haven't seen those. This one, really important, measuring real world impact. So new metrics for success. So as you're aware, these are a lot of the metrics we use to describe our research. However, it's different from field to field. For example, in science, field-weighted citation impact, H-index, super important. In engineering, they don't care. They don't have that publish or perish mentality. In engineering, it's about conference proceedings. So every year you're expected to speak at an international, a domestic, and a local conference. And you expect to publish proceedings there. And conference proceedings did rate higher on that previous engineering table than journals. And so that's that discrepancy. So what this means for interdisciplinary researchers is you have to do both. The burden is on us to work basically double as hard. It takes a lot of time. So it would be useful if we could move from prestige-centric metrics to tangible impacts. If there was a way to describe, well, I haven't published in Nature or Science, but this project that was commercial in confidence and therefore I can't publish it, actually had this impact. And you can see that from newspaper clippings about the restoration in such and such area. And in fact, we do have, again, assessment frameworks that already do this. Specifically, in this paper was in the environmental context, so very relevant, and it focused on relevance, credibility, legitimacy, and effectiveness of your research. So there's new metrics we can adopt. We just have to be brave and adopt them. And then the last two I have grouped together because they're quite interlinked. It's about building trust between disciplines and addressing project risk across fields. And so engineering and ecology is a classic example. There is a long-standing discourse that ecologists can't do maths and engineers don't care about the environment. And this creates mistrust, whether real or perceived. And so, because both groups do have different research agendas and priorities, and therefore they have tolerable levels of risk and uncertainty. As an example, in ecology, you wouldn't dare to do a project if it was going to risk the vulnerability of a single species. But in engineering, they say, if that's going to stop the project, look at all the other things you're losing. Lose one for the common good. It's a difference in perspective. But ultimately, anyone working in the field of ecological engineering, we all share the same common goal. We're just trying to go about it with different levels of risk. And the key thing here is that both of these, the risk and the lack of trust, they do influence conservation decision-making and project success. And I have a clear example of this here. So this is actually a piece of work that's currently in review in environmental science and policy, and it actually came out of the CBCS CSIRO Ocean and Collaboration Fund, where we interviewed restoration and nature-based solution practitioners globally. And so this was a small subset of the work where we asked a bunch of people, where do you experience reluctance? If you're trying to do a restoration project, what is stopping you? Who is stopping you from doing that? And on the x-axis, we have scientists who work in coastal engineering, so they're interdisciplinary. We have pure coastal engineers, project managers, and then scientists who are pure ecologists. So they're the 4 columns, and this is a heat map. The darker the color, the more responses. And on the y-axis, we have the people that provided the reluctance. And so initially you can see, well, coastal engineers actually received the most reluctance from other engineers. But the point of this is that you can see that the reluctance is different between different groups. And so each discipline has their own challenges because they have their own focuses. And so we need to understand those. And so the opportunity really is to bridge these communication gaps and increase transparency in project design. This is not new. You can find 100 papers on this, but it's still not being done. And so again, the burden might just be on us to do it. We need to run transdisciplinary workshops. If your research is applied, go out and find the person who can actually use it. Extend invitations to listen and learn. And so with that, I'll wrap up with some key takeaway messages. So interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research, it can lead to really high impact research because often our research is directly applied on the ground. But I should point out, it's not available to all researchers. You should not be punished for not having it, but we should be rewarded if we can do it. And it's very difficult to quantify these impacts. We need to translate our research for broader audiences and publish outside of just academic journals. Now, that doesn't mean that it's one or the other. You can publish the same research twice, just not into academic journals. You can publish in an academic journal and a trade journal, for instance. You can write for the conversation. You can write a half page and send it to a politician. And that leads us to collaborating beyond academia. I recently attended Science Meets Parliament, and the biggest takeaway that hit me pretty hard is they said, who is the decision maker? Who makes decisions you care about? And when I don't know who that is. If you're anything like me, you've written a lot of introductions or conclusions that say this has implications for climate change, policy, and decision makers. But those people have names, they actually exist. And unless you physically put your research in their hands, they're probably not going to know it exists. But they are real people. If you write a paper or you have some useful information, just email them a half-page summary and offer them a 5-minute Zoom call. All policy and decision makers want to make their country better. They're here to listen. And I guess the point is that challenges exist, but they will only be overcome if we do something. And so whilst we're constantly being told that we're a jack of all trades, master of none, it would be great if people knew the whole quote, because it's but often more useful than a master of one. Thank you. That was not a super self-indulgent rant.
Any questions?
Thanks very much, Alice. It's more a few years ago, Emily Nicholson, who did her PhD here, is now in Melbourne Uni, published in their commentary in science, advocating that you recalculate your output scores as full-time equivalent. So it's sort of like the dollar opportunity books. But this was on the basis of her taking maternity leave for a couple of years. And like recaptured CV saying this is my real output they should be doing that. There was a lot of uptake at the time. I'm not sure how it translated to the institutional level.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And an example I can give is there is Macquarie Uni have something called the Lighthouse Fellowship. It's basically a DECRA, and in fact, if you've written one, they encourage you to submit the DECRA as the Lighthouse Fellowship. But you need to be 3 years post PhD. And there they say you can use your FTE, your full-time equivalent hours. But if you have a 100% research-focused position, you don't get to argue that. You have only done research. Because I explained my case that, well, actually, I consult. And I can show you technical reports that I have published. And they said, well, no, you're a full-time researcher. You should have done full-time research because I have no demonstrable career interruptions. So it would be nice if it worked, but unfortunately, that still hasn't made it into the system yet. So the people who still are technically doing research, but they're applying their research, we don't really have a way to illustrate that yet. Yes.
So you paint a very big picture by you yourself as a role model on your own field and from your experience. Why is it worth it to go through all that pain, work double, and receive less than half of the recognition?
Because if not me, then who? So I'm really passionate about coastal conservation and restoration. Climate change is increasing storm frequency and intensity. In the next 5 years, it's estimated that 1 in 10 homes will be uninsurable in Australia. In some areas such as North Queensland and Western Australia, it's as many as 1 in 3. So look to your left, look to your right. You better hope that they lose their home. If not, it's going to be you. That's the bleak statistic in the future. We need to do something about it. I'm passionate and I happen to have the time, so I'm willing to do this. But the reason I'm continually harping on about how things need to change is because someone needs to pave the way, and I want to make it easier for the next scientists who come through so that they can do it. And it does work. So I was on the Centre for Marine Science committee for a few years, and I wasn't happy with the way it was being run. I eventually was nominated as the chair of the Early Mid-Career Researcher Committee, and I rewrote our terms of reference. I established them as official positions at UQ. I made diversity policies, which actually, without realising, it actually changed the entire policy of the Centre for Marine Science. So single people can make a difference because that's ultimately all that ever has. So people like me just have to do it so that now it's easier for the next people to come through. So it is hard, but I mean, no one's in academia for the money. I think we're all here because we're passionate. So it's difficult, but we need to do something. So that's why it's bleak now, but it's not always going to be. We're working at it. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat from
Oh,
Tony
yes.
C. Actually, it's like there's a couple of them now. Great talk, Alice. You've raised some very good points. I wonder if using altmetrics is a useful way to tell the story of your research impact, and agree it's hard to be a generalist. So thank you for your suggestions.
Yes, altmetrics is quite useful. However, bots exist now. And so one of the publications to which I'm co-author has been published in 162 news stories. I don't actually believe that it has, but it has, altmetrics is founded on the internet that many times, so it looks very impressive despite only being cited 4 times. But again, in news stories, it shows that my impact is widespread and that it's reaching a larger audience, but it doesn't mean that it's actually being used on the ground. Also, if you weren't aware, one of the logos I had up there was SAGE policy profiles, which is less common. But if you log on with your academic email, it will automatically populate with your research, and it will tell you all the policies globally where your research has been cited. And so when I signed up, I found that some of mine have been cited in New Zealand policy, which I had no idea existed. So if you haven't used SAGE, give it a go. But yes, that's a good suggestion. We just need to really get that on the ground impact in as well. Kaylee, you had a question?
I was wondering about your co-authors, if they're also all in like environmental space, or if there's differences between different subdisciplines, or so there's particular NGO versus government versus
Yes.
industry.
So that's another, it can be also difficult to work with other co-authors. So some of my co-authors are academics, some of them are ecologists. I have actually, I've started using astronomers and physicists in some of my work because they're very good at statistics and maths. Typically, I do work with environmental scientists and ecologists more than anyone else. When you start working with government and council, you suddenly get a lot of issues with commercial and confidentiality. So a lot of my work has embargo periods of several years on it. So I do a piece of research and then I sit on it. And I will publish it in 2027. And hopefully it's still relevant. There are some additional challenges with that because people want to work with researchers. People outside of academia really value the skill set that researchers have to offer, but there are additional challenges there. For instance, working with the US Geological Survey. Before submitting a paper, I have to send it to them and they go through all their internal reviews and they take any form of opinion out of your paper as well. So every single co-author does have a different agenda and there are some barriers to that. But yeah, quite diverse co-authorship. Yes.
Alice, I found myself nodding a lot during your talk. So I don't have the challenges that you face in that I am an ecologist.
Yeah.
And I work in applied ecology, but I think there's a lot of analogies between. So for me, wanting to apply the work that I do to on the ground initiatives. And I suppose it's a lot of comment, but that's some of the most rewarding work that I've ever done. In fact, I'm most proud of things that are just little reports to government that have actually influenced primary watering or land reservation, that kind of thing. So I suppose I'm just countering the kind of the perception perhaps that it is bleak or very challenging, but there's also like immense opportunities there and for satisfaction on creating that.
Yeah. That's exactly it. And so yes, to answer your question earlier, I guess it is challenging, but personally, I've contributed, my research has directly informed the restoration of 5,000 hectares of agricultural land back into coastal wetlands in just Queensland, 5,000 hectares. I'm pretty happy with that impact. And so that means I'm actually doing something, and that is the reward. So yes, I totally agree with you. But you had a follow-up question?
Yes, being a transdisciplinary expert has made you more effective into navigating the complexity of real life.
Yes, definitely. So as an example, because I worked as a consultant engineer for 7 years. And because of that, I know how projects get done. And when you, if a lot of you did your undergrad in environmental science, for instance, you will know that when you talk to med students, they have a different way of thinking. When you talk to engineers, they have a special way of thinking. I definitely have the engineer way of thinking. And so when I talk, but after doing a PhD in ecology, I really learned I have to totally change my way of thinking to solve the problems that they're trying to solve. But I have the engineering know-how. So I almost act as an intermediary person where I can take the engineering agenda and rehash it and present it to ecologists in a way that they can actually use. So yes, being transdisciplinary has definitely given me a wider skill set to apply my research more broadly because I can apply it in multiple fields. And I also have a much broader skill set. So I program across 4 languages. I do spatial analysis in 3 different programs, but I also do experimental design. I'm heavy on field work. I have a much broader set of skills than I otherwise would have. I'm not necessarily an expert in every one of those, but it allows me to apply my knowledge on more projects because the collaboration is really key. So yeah, I would highly encourage you, if you get the opportunity, to collaborate with people outside of academia.
I just want to leave a bit of a positive note here because I think this is excellent concepts to people to think about, especially early career researchers who try to navigate the future. And that is, I come from Canada, and our funding agency, NSERC, which is the equivalent of FRC, which is the agency that funds natural science and engineering, as it turns out, was very much about publication. So you submit part of your your grant, your discovery grant is your CV. And that CV used to be essentially a list of publications, list of talks, a list. So at some point it was just that. That's all you submitted, right? A page full of papers. And now over the years, in the last 3 years or so, they have actually changed that. And they have a list of different possible ways that you can explain your impact and your contributions. And interestingly, and I don't know if it's deliberate because it is going out to scientists, peer review publications is the last one that's listed because I guess, not that they're listed in any priority, but I think it's sort of, there's all these other things that are trying to bring people's attention to. So it could be things like, even advocacy is in there. This is science, right? And so it's taken whatever, my entire career to be able to write about these other things. But I just want to say that there is hope.
Yes.
And sort of the Canadian federal funding agency is actually acknowledging space to describe the kinds of impacts that you're doing. So ARC may be far behind, but maybe not that far behind.
Yeah.
There's hope. So keep fighting is
That's great
my
to hear.
point. Keep fighting.
I have a question about the science side of things. So, to me, the biggest problem of doing research across disciplines is that when I start out with a new discipline, I don't know anything about it. And papers are very often too specialized. I get specific information, but I don't get the background.
Yeah.
And what I've done now is reading textbooks. That's really efficient because they're like huge and most of the information I don't need. So do you have a good tip on how to get the background everybody knows, but nobody talks about in the field when you come from outside?
Yeah, that's really good because that was exactly what I faced as a HDR. I sat in on lectures. Again, it takes a long time. I did start reading textbooks the same way you are. Review papers are really good. And what I found out was actually really helpful is going on, if you've heard of the websites Coursera or edX, they have uploaded a lot of lecture series that if you pay, you can get a diploma in whatever, you know, MATLAB and statistics for the colleges or similar. But they run free, but you can do them for free, and that's a really quick way to upskill in a field because you do need it for beginners. You basically need first year courses. So sitting in on lectures, also UQ does allow that, by the way. You can just sit in, just email the course coordinator, say, I'm a HDR student, I want to learn, and sit in because that might only take 1 hour of your time. But don't worry about the intense learning curve at the start because, I mean, I'm 4 years post PhD. My PhD took a bit longer than most. It was in the middle of COVID, but I've been doing this for 9 years and now I'm an expert. You're not expected to be at the height of your field at the end of your postgrad. You build it up over time. Eventually, you just have the knowledge. So it does start slow, but you don't have to do it all at once. So what you're doing now is not a waste of time. It will just take the accumulation of several years. And then one day people will be like, oh yeah, he's the guy that knows about these 6 things. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, sorry. So this has been focused a lot on academia this year. What about outside academia? Is your interdisciplinary background appreciated, like in industry, for example?
Yes. So in fact, that's actually where it's really appreciated. So, and there are a lot of papers about how people in industry want that interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary perspective. So in engineering, as soon as they find out I am both an engineer and I have a PhD in something else, they're like, we want you. It makes you very desirable because you can talk across both worlds. There is a perception, that horrible quote, those who can't do teach. I disagree, those who can do very well teach. But there is a perspective in engineering that if you have postgrad qualifications, maybe it's because you weren't good as an engineer. But if you've done both, well, then you must be at the height of your field. That's the perception that I found in industry. They do view academics as experts, and if you have that industry experience, they just know you know how to talk to them. So yeah, it's never seen as a disadvantage in that sense.
Daniel has a question. He's going to unmute and ask.
Oh, sure.
Please go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, Alice. Thank you. That was an amazing presentation and really, really important topic. Sorry, I couldn't be there in person for it to get the extra energy there. I'm curious. My experience is that academia is actually its own worst enemy in this case. That you've just said that industry doesn't have a problem with it. There are examples that were put forward there by Anna about funders trying to figure it out, even government funders trying to figure out how to deal with this. You know, philanthropic funders absolutely have no issue whatsoever. They want to see the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary thing. But the stumbling block for me always seems to come back to academia. I am at UQ, not at Duke University, because Duke University could not fathom the utility of somebody engaging in policy environments the way that I was, right? Spending so much time of your time outside of academia and not just writing paper after paper after paper. And I'm curious if you have seen anything and what your experience is in the job market, because I think that's actually where it hurts the most, is the academic job market simply refuses to deal with transdisciplinary people in an appropriate manner, largely because particularly if you're looking for jobs outside of, if you're looking for jobs in the US, most of them are highly disciplinary. And whether you get tenure is dependent on how you do within your discipline, not even whether you have Nature papers or not. If you don't have disciplinary journal articles and you can't actually explain what your discipline is, then you don't get tenure. So I'm curious if you've seen anything or what your argument is for academics to correct themselves, because I feel like we are the problem. And even when I am encouraging and mentoring ECRs to get positions, I say the same thing that was said to me, which is you have to box yourself. You have to put yourself in a box that looks like a discipline and you can tell people what you're teaching. Otherwise, you're not going to get hired because they don't understand you and they won't bother to try to figure it out.
Great question. So actually,
Alice, could you just summarize it because I don't think it will go on the recording.
oh yes. Yeah. So Daniel just asked a question, basically posing that academics were our own worst enemy. In industry, it's well recognized that transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary research is the future. In academia, especially in the job market, they tend to promote and reward academics who are specifically a discipline expert in their one area. And so to answer that, Daniel, actually you gave me some very sage advice several years ago. I asked you a question about being interdisciplinary and you said, you can be, but you need to draw a box. You said that exact quote. And because of that, I said, great, I'm going to make my own box. And my box is ecological engineering. I actually didn't know that that was a term. I thought I made it up. Turns out it was made up before I was born. That's fine. But the point is, you can combine any two fields and just make a new word and just get really good at explaining that. Practice your science communication skills. For instance, if you are a lawyer and a biologist, say you're a biological lawyer. People are going to ask you, oh, what's that? And you'll say, this is this. And I just explain it as a matter of fact, as if it's existed forever, and people just assume that it has. But you're right. In academia, I actually only have 10 days left on my UQ contract. So I am swirling in the job market limbo at the moment. And yes, being a single discipline expert definitely does reward you. I can't find jobs in environmental science that recognise that the benefits that I bring as an engineer. So the burden is on me to describe them. Interestingly enough, there are a few exceptions. If you are an early career researcher, there are a lot of European fellowships available to you. And I can't say too much, but I recently have been headhunted for a fellowship that I will be submitting hopefully tonight. And they specifically wanted an interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary fellow who works on conservation projects. So there is some change happening. It's just changing in Europe, not so much in Australia yet. So yes, Daniel, I agree with you. As academics, we are our own worst enemy. And so I think the onus is up to us. It's one of those things, we have to be the change. The people who are doing the promoting, if they are more senior, well, eventually they will retire. We take their place and we promote into disciplinary, transdisciplinary research. That's how I see it going, but there are a lot of opportunities available, for instance, in Europe. So there is a good news story there.
I have just a note of appreciation from your co-author, Jaden Hyman.
Oh, great.
It was a pleasure to work with you on this piece, Alice. Thanks for leading the charge with highlighting challenges and opportunities and being an example for other ECRs.
Oh, thank you, Jaden. Thank you for creating the graphical abstract that no one wanted to do. There was, I think, one question at the back.
Thanks, Alice. My work are quite eclectic, so I appreciate how we actually try to pave the way for people who work transdisciplinary. I do have a bit. This is sort of more like it's like supporting what Anna is saying. In Malaysia, in the past 5 years, I think we have seen an increasing trend of funders giving more merits to interdisciplinary research projects. But of course, the downside is that the burden falls back to the researchers. They have to be more interdisciplinary, or they have to collaborate more with people from different disciplines. And I'm not sure whether this can be one of the solutions, which because like 2 years ago when I first came to Brisbane, I learned from someone, a friend of friend. She was once her position was called a knowledge broker. So knowledge brokers are people who actually look at some potential projects that have valuable implementation in the industries or in government policies. So they will actually be the middle person to bridge the research and the industry. So I'm not sure having these people around would actually alleviate or try to maybe take some burden off your kids, so they can focus more on maybe things that you would like to do more.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't know those existed. It's good to, that sounds like, yeah, it would take the burden off, and it sounds like they're trying to promote really interdisciplinary teams, which is great to hear. Fantastic.
All right, well,
Perfect.
right now it's